Welcome to Dynamos Dozen and the four Podmen, once again by me and Niall, your two co-hosts, where we never forget talc, we never forget fresh socks and jocks, we never forget movies, we do actually forget movies and all that kind of stuff, but we do talk professional wrestling. Sports entertainment here today, guys. Welcome to the show. Once again, as always, brought to you by the Dynamo Podcast Network, your number one network for absolutely everything in the world of entertainment and sports. Please do like and subscribe. Be sure our favorite podcasting sites as well, from Spotify to Anchor to Apple Podcasts and everything in between. Today, we brought you something a little bit different, a little bit similar to what we do on other podcasts on the network. And we had this idea where we would try really, really hard to bring you a special series that we're going to do, our top 10 wrestlers from different genres. So today we're starting with the 80s. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to work our way through the 90s and the noughties and the 10s and today even. But today it is the 80s, and you will see that nice fluorescent lighting that we have on in the background. We've both got nice pink glows off our face. No, we have not been sunburned. It is October, it is the month of Seven, so it's freezing cold over here in Ireland as we speak. But we are warm. We've got that sexy vibe that we're bringing today. And Niall, this is going to be fun, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is really a decade of pro wrestling, isn't it? The 80s. It's a golden era, really, for the
best,
business.
Really, yeah. Well, one of the best, yeah.
Yeah, and such a difficult task to pick a top 10. When you kind of think
are we gonna pussy out? Are we gonna do it in no particular order, because it was so difficult? I mean, we probably had a short list of about 30 to 40 guys, and to wind it down to 10 was extremely difficult for both of us. So are we going to do it in any particular order, or?
No, I think it would be hard to put them in any order apart from the man. You know what I mean? I mean, I think if he's not number one on most people's lists, we have a problem, really, don't we? But I think in no particular order, probably run down through our 10. What we'll do is bounce one on one, like a tennis game, maybe do it that way, because I know there's probably going to be a bit of crossover and a bit of debate and a bit of debate.
Neither of us know who we've chosen, so that is 100% legitimate.
Yeah,
we didn't share our top 10 today in any way, shape, or form. So
this is a proper blind bag job.
We're calling it in the ring, like they did in the 80s. That's what
absolutely, yeah, going back old school. But I suppose we should throw in a few notable mentions at the end as well, because there's a lot of people I had to leave off my list that I tried to crowbar in one way or another that I couldn't.
Yeah,
100%. But they should definitely be mentioned. They had a big part to play in the 80s.
And it could change next week for us as well, so that's why we should honorably mention them.
Well, that was the difficulty as well in approaching this, because there was guys who started out in the 80s, but they may have only spent maybe 2, 3, 4 years there. So they didn't really leave that imprint in the 80s. And then if most of their career is through the 90s, you know, you're doing them a disservice including them in the 80s, but it's still hard to leave them out, you know. So it was
That's why I was the same. There's going to be some surprises from me as well. There's going to be certain people that aren't mentioned and they'll be like, what? But because they know me.
I came from the approach of the guys that I watched and grew up on. As opposed to guys that won the most titles or, you know, had the biggest runs or any of that kind of thing. You know what I mean? It was mainly guys that struck a chord with me in the 80s when I was watching wrestling.
Well, like I said, for me, it was a little bit different as well, because obviously, you know, 89 was my first, you know, mania as such. And even at that, you know, if I was to, I'd be lying if I said I remembered it, you know, move for move, hold for hold. You know, it was more the next year, you know, being, you know, 7 years old, and you're like, okay, now I understand what's going on with Warrior and Hogan. But the 80s is when I definitely remembered professional wrestling being on the telly. So I remembered some of the characters by look, but, you know, so, and as you said, like, we were still afforded being able to see a lot of that NWA stuff from UTV and stuff. So I definitely remembered some of these characters. So, let's jump into it, Niall. Why don't you kick us off with number 10?
Yeah, it's not necessarily number 10 because these are, to me,
No,
these
we're
are
gonna
all
say 10
ones.
just so
So we have a
I'm
count,
really
some sort of a countdown, some sort of a
I'm really bad
chronological
at
order.
maths, so
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, at number 10, but definitely not number 10. You got to go with the rowdy one, don't you? Roddy Piper has to be in there. Man who came
I
through.
had him higher. The argument starts already. I had him higher.
Yeah. Well, I don't have him at number 10. He's number 1 on my list, but I'm just working down through it. But definitely higher.
Yeah, okay.
But a man who came through the whole territory system, a man who redefined promo, Piper's Pit, everything that he did, was absolutely instrumental in the WrestleManias in the early days, from 1 to 2 and all the way through to 3, where he forced kind of was in instrumental in bringing Andre and Hogan together. If we remember those great promos in Piper's Pits, and you know, Andre grabbing Hogan and ripping the chain off his neck, and Hogan saying yes to the match and all that kind of thing. But even his own matches in there and stuff like that, an absolutely outstanding wrestler, and has to be in anyone's top 10 for the 80s.
Well, yeah, the original promo guy, really, especially as a heel. And I mean, talk about real heat. This is your guy. Obviously spent a lot of time down in with Don Owens, obviously, in the NWA territories in Northwest, but then really kind of made his name going to the Carolinas and working with the likes of Steamboat and Flair. Unbelievable.
Jack Briscoe.
I mean, anyone that knows me, anyone that knows me knows that, even with Valentine, you know what I mean? The stuff he done with Valentine was fantastic. So anyone that knows me knows he's probably going to make an appearance again later in the show. So
he's next. People know I collect the buddies now. He's my next custom buddy to get made in the kilt with the pink, with the blue knee pads and all. I'm actually.
Well, I'll probably have to. You'll probably have to order 2.
Yeah, and I also have coming this week. I have the Mr. T Piper double pack figures. So yeah, big fan.
That's on the way as well for me. In the box and the kilt, the flannel shorts. Awesome. I went with, again, not number 10, but in my top 10, I went with Ricky Steamboat. People are going to say, "Well, why is he so, why is he so high up there? Why is he so low?" Again, it's a top 10, not number 10 to 1.
It's not a ranking.
Look, what can you say about Ricky Steamboat that hasn't already been said? I mean, probably the original kind of workhorse, so to speak, in the NWA, and especially in the Carolinas, again, coming up under, I suppose, tutelage in a way of Ric Flair. You know what I mean? He was the yin to the yang. You want to look at the best series of matches of all time, I still think hands down that him and Flair's are probably the greatest matches of all time. I doubt you would disagree with me on that.
No, absolutely.
Still, his match with Randy Savage at WrestleMania 3 is still talked about to this day as one of the greatest WrestleMania matches, and it's hard to argue. The epitome of the white meat good guy babyface, and took the craft so incredibly serious that, like, he would even rub the towel, the old towel trick on his head to give himself kind of welts and stuff, so he got home and his family actually thought he was in a physical fight. So his work even with Jake the Snake Roberts, that DDT on the outside, I mean, good lord, kayfabe was real, wasn't it, back then? So yeah, Ricky Steamboat makes my list. It's impossible not to put him in.
I've mentioned it before on our episodes. The man who made me freeze in time at Mania 25 with that crossbody off the top rope. And just think about what year that was. And we're revering about this man now from the 80s. Just have a think about that,
Yeah, it's
unbelievable.
incredible.
The run with Savage was unbelievable. All the matches he had, the relationship with George the Animal Steele, incredible worker. And definitely a huge part in the success of the Nature Boy Ric Flair.
For sure.
And as you can tell, was on my list as well.
Yes.
This one I'm going to steal from you because I know you'd want to have dropped this one. Harley Race.
Yeah.
Absolute wrestling royalty. When you talk about, we've gone through a week recently of the king and the queens of WWE. When we talk about a king of wrestling, we talk about King Harley Race. What an absolute man. A man who stood for everything and made pro wrestling as real as it could be.
Yeah, I mean, what can I add to Harley Race? Obviously, while he was still with us, was a friend of the network, and like I say, an absolute honor to not just have had him as a guest on a podcast, but to get to know him and his son, and some of the stuff, I've always said it, some of the stuff they've done for me in the past will never be forgotten. Even though he wasn't in the best of health at that time, he was still very coherent and still all there. Never got to have that beer with him, unfortunately. Which
that old school, that old school raspy voice, incredible.
Oh, well, I gotta tell you, Dynamo, I'm very happy to be here today. It's I mean, he again took one of my favorite wrestlers who will be making an appearance later under his wing. Was like a father figure, and just rest in peace. But again, one of the epitome of what a world heavyweight champion should be in the world of professional wrestling, in my opinion.
In every facet.
Yeah, in every facet. In the ring, out of the ring, just a man's man, right? I mean,
if it's not real to those guys, how can it be real to us?
If you asked JBL who's a real wrestling god, I guarantee he's telling you Harley Race. Yeah,
absolutely.
So, okay, well, I'll go with someone that I know is going to be on your list as well. I went with Dusty Rhodes.
Absolutely.
Let me tell you something, Daddy.
One of my
Wine and dine with kings and queens. I've slept in alleys and pork and beans. You know what I mean? This guy was just, again, someone probably that I didn't appreciate until I got into the business. Do you know what I mean? Because when I was watching, he would have been the polka dot wearing, kind of dancing, jive talking, just fat guy. It's the way I saw him. You know what I mean? And Sweet Sapphire was there. And I was like, what? Who put these two together? What's the story? These don't look right. But good Lord, when you go back and look at Dusty's body of work and the influence that he had inside and outside of the ring in terms of his book and what he'd done in Florida with Florida Championship Wrestling as well. You look at his legacy living on through his boys. It's just incredible. But most importantly, like three-time world champion, and again a real heavyweight wrestling champion. A legit stigma. He could take the piss, but he could turn it on when it needed to be. I mean, that bionic elbow, it's just fantastic, isn't it? Like he was second most recognizable athlete only to Muhammad Ali.
His timing of knowing when it was time to throw down and when it was time to be showman was just incredible. And the blend of the two was incredible to watch. And it was only the other day I was looking at his Hall of Fame speech, and he spoke about how he went those 1 hour matches. He did 7 of them on a trot in 1 week. And he said he could only do it with the greatest of all time, the Nature Boy Ric Flair. And
unbelievable.
That's a testament to the man. When they talk about this man being out of shape and carrying weight and big and stuff like that, he regularly went 1 hour matches bell to bell. And we're not talking about sitting around and sitting on sit holds. This guy could go till sweat was pouring out of him.
His cardio was fantastic. You know what I mean? And he held his weight well. You know what I mean? He had a look. He had just oozed charisma. I mean, again, one of the best talkers of all time. But like you say, he could do the sweet jive talking promo, being the son of a plumber and all that. But then he could get very serious when he needed to be.
Yeah, he never made the hokey stuff feel hokey.
Never.
Like if you've seen someone else doing that bionic elbow, you think, you know what I mean? But I also think, I mean, if you want to check out what Dusty Rhodes meant to me, go back and look at our episode from a few weeks ago with Magnum TA. I was engrossed in wrestling at the time when the Cold War, the Reagan Gorbachev time was at its peak. And Dusty Rhodes, to me, represent everything that meant freedom. And even when he got together with Nikita and the superpowers and all the stuff he did, and
it's the anniversary as we record right now. This day, back 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah,
incredible. Dusty Rhodes. So who have you got next?
Next up, I'm gonna put in the Road Warriors, because
I knew you'd be a cheating bastard with this. You see, I decided that I was gonna leave the tag teams separate, but okay. Yeah. I knew you were gonna throw me a curveball.
Well, we can definitely do a tag teams version of it as well. But I put in the Road Warriors because the Road Warriors, to me, 80s wrestling was when men were men, and the Road Warriors epitomized that, both in their ring work, in their promos, in their storylines, and everything that they put together. You knew these were two absolute badasses, and they have to make the list for 80s wrestlers without a shadow of a doubt.
No, well, I don't disagree with that.
One tag team gold in every place that they went, and were just incredible.
Yeah, no, they really were. I mean, I can't disagree with that. And you've said, I mean, if someone said that they're the best tag team of all time, you couldn't tell them that they're wrong. If we were doing tag teams, then I'd have had both of the Bulldogs in there and the Hart Foundation and all that.
Oh yeah.
But I was like, I'm counting. Mine is going to be singles anyway. But we can do a tag team one in the 80s, because I mean, that was the year of the tag team, right?
Yeah.
Or the decade of the tag team. I went with a fellow Podman of ours is going to be very happy with my next pick. Shout out to Jay Kennedy, who you probably haven't seen in a while, but I went with Rick Rude. And the reason I went with Rick Rude is not only did he have a body that made both men and women swoon, he was just an absolutely incredible wrestler. I mean, I know you could say he's kind of in both genres, the 90s as well, because a lot of his great work in the 90s came in the WCW side, where you watched him work with the likes of Austin and Steamboat and Dustin Runnels. But in the 80s, when you look at his stuff that he'd done down south with the likes of Jerry Lawler, he had an amazing feud in Memphis with Lawler, if you can recall that.
Yeah.
And he had Percy Pringle as his manager at one point, which is, of course, the late, great Paul Bear. He was just, man, he went to WWE then, and obviously he was definitely up there as a semi-main character. Do you know what I mean? He was that workers wrestler that could work with anybody, that could make a star. Just look at what he done with the Warrior. I mean, the Warrior had his best matches, running matches with Rick Rude. So for me, I'd be absolutely doing an injustice to myself and to the sport if I didn't have Rick Rude in my top 10.
Absolutely. My first memories of Rick Rude would have been with the Midnight Express, when he was tagging with Manny Fernandez. Paul Jones was their manager. And I always remember his promos, and he'd talk, and he'd be sincere in the way he talked, and he'd go, "Tell him, Paul." And I just remember those all promos. And of course, shout out to Manny Fernandez. What an absolute baller of a wrestler.
Unreal, man. So underrated. I don't even know whether it's underrated or forgotten, but it's probably a blend of the two. Yeah. But I mean, he was Ric Flair in his own right, wasn't he?
There's not many of our viewers would remember the Midnight Express with Paul Jones, Manny Fernandez, and Rick Rude. But that's my first memories of Rick Rude.
Go back and look at some of the promos. What we will say, especially when you look at it on some of Lawler TV, the Memphis TV, when you look at it down there, and you look at it in, I think it was Mid-South as well, didn't they? They'd done a run, because they would have kind of been all around there in the Carolinas, but they'd done a lot of stuff in Memphis as well.
Yeah.
Just a thing of beauty.
And stood out at a time when wrestling tag teams was golden at the time, with the tag teams that you had. They still stood out. And also the man who probably had the greatest mustache in wrestling.
Robbinsdale Rock, Minnesota crew.
That's it.
Go ahead.
Who am I putting in next? Okay, Randy Savage, Macho Man Randy Savage has to make the list. I know people will say, okay, there's some stuff that he did there in the 80s and stuff like that. And a lot of our viewers will remember him from the WWF times and the Intercontinental Run, and Ricky Steamboat and George Steele and Tito Santana and all.
But you're going to talk about Florida, right?
I would allude to Florida and the work that he did there, and tell our viewers, go and check it out. This is a man who probably transcends decades, because He had the capability of reinventing himself literally weekly.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But he was incredible, and a man that was taken away from the business too early in terms of being shoved onto commentary. But again, we're not talking about that kind of period. But absolutely brilliant. The stuff he did with Jerry Lawler in Mid-South, and you know, his stuff down in Florida and all. I mean, the Poffos are legendary down there, you know what I mean? So but I mean, Randy Macho Man Savage, you have to put him in there, don't you?
Yeah, 100%. How can you not? Yeah. I've went with I'm gonna hand this over to you when I mention the name. Hulk Hogan.
Yeah, well, what can you say about that? It's, you know, it's just, to me, you know, a lot of people look at this guy and they talk about him that he didn't do the jobs and he didn't put the people over when he should and all that kind of things. But he created mainstream entertainment. He lifted wrestling out of the carny situation and onto the mainstream. He made following pro wrestling cool. He dragged stars in, stuff he did with Rocky III to put it out there to get people to get eyes on wrestling. You know, WrestleMania, the match with Andre, the matches prior to that, the stuff he did with Paul Orndorff, winning the belt off Sheik. Like, it's just, these are all very seminal moments in pro wrestling that led us along that pathway, not necessarily to where we are today, but to where we were back then, if you like. You know what I mean? It kind of laid the foundation and the groundwork for what was going to roll out in the 90s. And he was a big part of that. So, and absolutely, you know, when you say to people pro wrestling, who do they mention? Everyone knows who Hulk Hogan is.
Even today, you know what I mean? It's for me, it's, I mean, there's no doubt that he's in my, you know, in my top 10 purely because it's really the one that brought me into the world of professional wrestling. Do you know what I mean? And made me as a kid go, wow, that guy is like he was the first real life comic book hero, wasn't he?
Yeah, if you're a pro wrestling fan in the 80s, everyone wanted to be a Hulkamaniac.
Of course, unless you're Jay and you were.
Even Jay wanted to be a Hulkamaniac. He just won't admit it.
Oh no, he'll never admit it, but it's true. So yeah, Hulk Hogan makes the list. I feel like I should have a pen every time we say that. And a pad.
Something going into the back here or something like that, yeah. Down to me, is it? It's my turn again.
It's you next. You're next.
This is one I wouldn't think you have on your list. I have two here that I don't think you would have. Nick Bockwinkel.
He was this close. His work in the AWA particularly stands out to me, especially his run near the end when he had that series of matches with Kurt Hennig when he wasn't Mr. Perfect. He was just Kurt Hennig and they were wrestling for the world title. Nick Bockwinkel, good Lord, I went back and watched some of his matches, especially even some of the Calgary stuff that he'd done up there with Archie Goldie, the Stomper and all. He's you're not wrong for putting him on there.
Yeah, I think that the run of matches he had with Vern Gagne, Hulk Hogan and Billy Robinson were unbelievable and stuff like that. And I also put him in because I always like those little phrases that these old school guys come out with. And he turned around and he says he would raise his arm in his sleep if he heard someone counting to two. And I mean, that's just golden. That'll tell you how much this guy believed in pro wrestling. You know what I mean? That statement puts him on the list straight away.
That's probably one of the best statements of all time. Yeah. I wish I put him on my list just because of that.
I just thought it was brilliant.
Beautiful. I've also, we're getting into now crossovers. I went with Savage.
Okay.
Because how can you not? Different kind of pro wrestler, more so, you know, we know the story about him now being such a paranoid android type guy and meticulous, and you know, he wouldn't be, you know, your Harley Racer, your Ric Flair, whatever we call him in the ring. Now, I'm sure he had the ability, but he obviously had so much paranoia about being a perfectionist that, you know, he had to, you know exactly what was going on at all times, which is not a bad thing. But I'd say it would have been a nightmare to work with at times, to be fair.
Steamboat talks about the full scap pad for WrestleMania 3 all the time.
Page 52, you know, like it's like, what the hell am I
like Jericho's list of holes.
Yeah, Oh my God, even worse.
Yeah.
But again, I talked about his stuff like, he actually, when we go out of WWE and we go back to where he basically worked himself into a shoot, what people thought was a shoot with Jerry Lawler when he worked in Florida,
Mm.
basically calling him out and saying that he was a bum and all this kind of stuff, and like so much so that Jerry Lawler had to actually get him on the Memphis TV circuit.
Yeah.
He was just made for WWE, wasn't he? I mean, it's funny when you go back and you look at his debut as well, when he first came in and he's got this wild cape on him, and you're like, what is this guy? I think it was also Madison Square Garden, wasn't it? It was definitely his MSG
Yeah.
debut. It was one of those. They probably all looked the same back then because you just
Yeah.
saw the Marlboro and the Budweiser logos all around the Hordens.
Yeah.
But Jesus Christ, I mean, you talked about a man reinventing himself as well, and I'm sure he'd probably be on our top 10 in the 90s as well, because he really did go
Yeah.
into WCW and reinvented himself there as well. Just a consummate professional wrestler, and
Yeah.
what a guy.
What the intensity of him from bell to bell, and from start to finish in the promo.
Mad.
And I always remember when he take off the shades, the eyes were just crazy. And also when he take off those headbands, the headbands that used to match the robes, and the hair would stay exactly where it was with the headband, because the headband would have been on so tight that it took about 5 minutes into the match before the hair loosened up a bit from the headband mark. But
he used to have to spray like his hair just to stay intact because he was so worried about going bald. And I mean, that's a lad who had the worst thinning hair ever, and it stayed with him for the whole time. Whatever way he done it.
Yeah.
For anyone going bald out there that has long hair, just look at Macho Man Randy Savage and try and see if you can fucking replicate that. You'd be grand.
When you're seeing him with the haircut, you always have to take a double take, because it just didn't look right. Sure, it didn't. It was like, what the hell? It reminds me of Triple H now, but you still can't take Triple H with the haircut. It just looks weird.
No, 100%.
Yeah, but great pick.
So you're up next.
Yeah, another man that I don't know whether you'd have on your list, but probably you would put him in there somewhere. Bob Backlund.
Yeah, another one that I looked at. Yeah, I mean, obviously, he was a bit more boring than all of the to the everyday Joe. He was a bit more boring. Obviously, he had great kind of programs with Bruno and stuff like that. When they were actual contests.
Sheik.
Sheik. Oh, good Lord, the stuff with Sheik was fantastic. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, look, Bob Backlund. I mean, even today, the lad can probably outdo anyone in a push-up contest, and he's probably 150 years old. You know what I mean? Just a great worker. Didn't need. Again, he was the white meat babyface. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Didn't need anything, other than the fact that he was just a fantastic wrestler. Kind of reminds you of the Malenkos a little bit in that sense, wouldn't he? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just straight shooters, like.
Yeah. Also sometimes he doesn't get the credit he deserves for his part played in the birth of Hulkamania as well, because it was him who sort of set up that Sheik Hogan thing, but also a man, like, his mat wrestling was incredible as well, you know what I mean? And it's just...
It was great that he actually had. I only recently went back and watched the kind of run and program that he had in '94 with Bret. Now, the Survivor Series match wasn't great because they had so much stipulation on it, and the I quit thing and all. It was very believable as a kid watching it, as a 10-year-old, kind of going, geez, who's this psychopath in the fucking blue trunks?
Yeah.
Shitty looking boots. Coming in, like, taking the belt off the Hitman. What is this?
Yeah.
Only when you went back then and looked at his back catalogue of stuff and you were like, good Lord, this lad was serious,
Yeah, so I definitely put him on my list. I just think somewhere on the list you can have the side of the flamboyance of Hogan, the flamboyance of Savage, the greatness of Hulkamania. You can have, the unbelievable draw of Roddy Piper, all those different wrestlers. But I think somewhere on your list you have to have a guy who's just a wrestler. And that's why I included Bob on
similar to Nick Bockwinkel as well, though. You know
exactly.
what I mean? Even though he had a lot more charisma and a lot more, I suppose, one-liners and stuff like that.
Yeah,
still a wrestler's wrestler. The same way Harley races. You'll notice a trend with the two of us anyway. It's 90% wrestling, like
100%. Well, we're talking the 80's. You know, I mean, we're
Yeah.
talking the 80s, and a lot of it was that, you know.
Yeah. I went with, speaking of wrestlers, and having the total package, and no, it's not Lex Luger. Sorry, Lex. I put him over in my Halloween Havoc episode, though, so no one should think I have a problem with him. I went with my dear friend and yours now, Mr. Magnum TA.
Yeah, great choice.
I mean, this is the epitome of an 80s wrestler, isn't he? Could have been anything he wanted to be and would have been. Just good Lord, you know, looking at his work in Florida, then in Crockett Promotions, obviously his relationship with Dusty was huge. But for anyone that hasn't seen it, there's some YouTube matches, and I tried to say this to a couple of guys recently, including my very own coach, Mr. Tracy. Happy birthday to Paul Tracy today.
Shout out to the Lord of the Manor.
Yeah, and everyone knows that Flair is his guy. And I remember like sending him a match a while back, going, check this out with Magnum, and it was in one of those stadiums when he used to do those cross promotions. And my God, like the timing that man had. When you think about what he told us with his story, how quick he picked that up. Like, this is Kurt Angle level quickness of picking up a business of sharks at that time. Absolute sharks, you know what I mean? He didn't have the protection of, you know, someone like Angle would have been protected and brought in as an asset, you know what I mean? And probably wrapped in cotton wool and be like, right, we've got a real life Olympic champion here. This guy was in with sharks that would eat you for dinner, breakfast, and lunch. And he just took to that like I've never seen anyone at that particular time. Yeah, one of the, you know, even in his short little kind of time within the business, you know, as he would probably tell you, it's a cup of coffee. They all like that one back in the day. Just for me, absolute and amazing guy as well. Anyone that wants to go back and check out our previous episode, do. He's just the biggest gentleman you'd ever meet. But good Lord, that lad. And, you know, he was the epitome of, I would actually recommend anyone trying to be a babyface today, go back and look at how he used to fire up, similar to Steamboat. You know, you'd see them do that, come on, and they get the crowd, and the crowd would just pop. You know what I mean? It was like, this is our guy, fucking get him. And Flair, it was just his run with, his run with Tully and Nikita are always going to be the big standouts. But just go and watch how he wrestled Ric Flair, who was fucking seasoned at that time, the man. And he stands toe to toe with him. And yeah, I mean, Flair said it himself, didn't he? And Jim Ross, that he was the next guy.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely, absolutely. Who am I going to pop in now? I think I've only one left on the list that hasn't been mentioned, so I have to pop him in there. But I know he's yours and mine. The Nature Boy, Ric Flair. I mean, it's very hard when I go back and I look at the 80s and I look at Crockett Promotions and stuff like that. This guy was just unbelievable, but he had some great friends around him at the time as well, with the Four Horsemen and JJ Dillon. But as a man, as a performer, as a heel, as a guy who wanted to live the lifestyle and show you what could be achieved and the fruits of his labor and all that kind of stuff, it's just incredible. I watched the promo of him there the other day. He was in a red polo shirt and he was in some nick. He was in serious shape. And he popped out an old bicep pose out from underneath the sleeve of the red polo shirt and told Lex Luger to check it out. And that's a man with, and you know, this is Lex Luger, who had, you know, arguably one of the best bodies in wrestling at the time, if not in history, in terms of the complete symmetry and package that he had. But Flair, like, what do we say about Flair? I mean, the guy could probably run down into an AEW ring right now, throw his jacket off, elbow dropping, and get the biggest pop of the night. You know what I mean? He's everywhere he's gone, he's carried the pop, he's carried the crowd. You know, he was a man who put bums in seats. You know, wrestling royalty, made a point of making everyone look brilliant while still winning on the way. But you never stepped out of a Ric Flair ring becoming a lesser man. You're always greater for it.
Yeah. Everyone knows he's going to be on my list too, so I'll add my 2 pence in when it comes to him. It's my turn to go to the crossover as well. Anyone that knows me knows that one of my favorite of all time in my top 5 is the rowdy one, Roddy Piper. I love that man in every single way possible, like in the sense of I love them outside of the ring, hearing the story. Another tragedy. My biggest regret, as you know, is that you had a fucking ticket for me that you didn't even want money for. To see his spoken word while he was here in Dublin, and we had a prior engagement, and it wasn't long after that he did pass, and that actually, that actually still haunts me a lot. Just to have shaken his hand one time would have been, amazing. But Roddy Piper, I mean, the original heel, you know what I mean? This guy was just born to fucking anger people. Everyone knows he's in one of my favorite films of all time. He turned into a great actor as well. He was just the epitome. He was like the cult of personality. Do you know what I mean? This is when you look at the likes of CM Punk and all now, you'll see CM Punk, they say is like, Piper was my guy, and you see the influence that he's had on some of the really standout people that then came from his character, the likes of your Jerichos and CM Punks and stuff like that. He was just fantastic. And see, the thing about it is, a lot of people think he couldn't wrestle, but he was actually a very, very good amateur wrestler as well. But he knew how to work a different style and make it different to anything that you've ever seen before. I mean, arguably, some people will say one of his best matches is probably the one against Brett at 7 or at 8, should I say? Sorry,
8.
Which I think he's often said it probably is up there as one of his just best matches, pound for pound. Even when you look, like, he goes into it as a baby face, but he can't help being a heel in it, but then just cutting it off, with the ring bell, and be like, oh, and then he garners sympathy from the fans. They're like, well done, he didn't hit him over the head with it, and you got Bobby Heenan on commentary, hit him, I'd do it. Give it to me, I'll hit him. That was one of the best lines ever. Bobby the Brain Heenan, give it to me, I'll hit him for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just Roddy Piper, I mean, good Lord, another one, rest in peace, gone way too young. I hear his sons are doing pretty decent in the indie scenes as well.
Yep.
Last I checked. Be great to see the Piper name continue on in the world of professional wrestling, but good Lord, Roddy Piper, he is literally the most unique wrestler of all time and one of a kind. I mean the most unique. Prove me wrong. I'd say that to anybody.
Yeah, I describe him at times as a man who made me care about matches that I necessarily wouldn't have cared about.
Yeah.
And that's how I describe him, because when I think of Piper at times, I still think of him in the ring, cutting Adrian Adonis's hair and throwing it up in the air and everything and stuff like that. Matches that you necessarily wouldn't have cared about, but he brought that kind of angle to it and that kind of intensity and madness and stuff like that you said to yourself, you don't know what's going to happen here, so you have to tune into it,
But,
so yeah,
but I mean,
cool.
like, if he was in today's society as well, he'd be the same. Even if he'd be still running his podcast, all this kind of cancel ideology and all that stuff.
None of that's in his world. None of that's in his world.
Like, get fucked. You know what I mean? So yeah, Roddy Piper. We're down to the final 3 here now. This is where it gets interesting, because we could we definitely have some crossovers, but
yeah, I had Steamboat in there, of course, and we spoke about him. So I mentioned Harley, Dusty, Rick, Road Warriors, Randy, Hulk. We spoke about Hulk, Bockwinkel, and Backlund. My 10 is more or less, I think I'm done. I'm down to honorable mentions. So it's what's left on your list, I think, because of the crossover.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I went with Flair and Harley as well, obviously.
Yeah.
And we talked about both of them, but one that I had to mention that was always going to be in my list, and I think you know who I'm going to say, don't you?
Absolutely.
A certain man from Wigan in Manchester. Yes. Yeah. The thing about Dynamite is the man of 1,000 holes.
Yeah.
Dynamite Kid. I mean, you know, and this is purely, we talked about wrestling and wrestlers. This guy makes it on merit because of the solo stuff that he was doing in Japan. I mean, I don't know if there's a better set of matches in the history of professional wrestling. I mentioned, Flair and Steamboat, but I mean, that's on a big scale, but I mean, if you're just looking at it as a physical contest, is there a better set of matches ever, that looked more legit than Tiger Mask and Dynamite?
No.
I don't believe so.
No.
I don't believe so. As I said, horses for courses. You're looking at the glitz and the glamour and the characters and stuff when it comes to, Flair and Steamboat and, but good Lord, just literally getting in there. I mean, this is a lad who would slap a fucking 12-year-old kid and they'd thank him for it, to be a heel over in Japan. Dynamite, I mean, well, you know what? People have always heard me talk about Dynamite now. Actually, maybe be interested to hear your thoughts on it.
I'm going to give you a little story about Dynamite. Not necessarily about his career or anything like that. Last week, I was at home looking after dogs, as I do sometimes, and we had a bulldog in. And I said, when we have a bulldog in, you know what I got to do. So I was bringing the bulldog out for a walk and had the bulldog league. I think I sent you guys some videos on it in the group. Yeah. And I was walking up the road with the bulldog. And because the avenue we're in is quite quiet, so you can kind of get away with things without looking crazy. And everyone knows when it comes to wrestling, I'm a big kid anyway. So I was walking the bulldog up the avenue. So I said to myself, I transported myself back to those WrestleManias and those bulldog foundation matches. So I was doing the entrance and I was imagining on the way up, I was Dynamite. So I was walking like the bulldogs with the toes pointed out and Matilda in front of me. Now his name was Fred. It wasn't Matilda, but I was calling him Matilda.
It was Matilda on this day.
And this was early morning now. This was 7:30, 8 o'clock. And I had the Bulldogs theme tune playing on the phone. And I was just envisioning myself walking out to the ring with the Bulldog. And on the way down, I was doing Dynamite on the way up. And on the way back down the avenue, I was doing Davey Boy Smith. And I just thought, that's my kind of little thing. Sometimes I throw out these little personal quiet on the side tributes where I teleport myself back to these guys. But Dynamite Kid, I mean, he wasted himself away for our entertainment. You know what I mean? It was destructive the way he worked. Had an unbelievable physique. What a wrestler. In terms of holds, in terms of intensity, you've never seen a snap suplex like it. A headbutt off the top rope, and an intensity in a man that, looking at him, he could absolutely beat the piss out of anyone he wanted. And that's how I describe him. I mean, forget about his ring work was unbelievable. He laid the foundation for so many good wrestlers, people that sort of, I wouldn't say follow him, but I think they styled themselves slightly on him. I mean, go back to Chris Benoit, who was carbon copy at times. Even our own Finn Balor, when you look at his physique and you look at the way he works and the intensity in the moment and stuff like that, shades of Dynamite through that all the time, absolutely. Yeah. Unbelievable. So you see it, you see these guys wrestling, you look at Pac, you look at Balor, we looked at Benoit, even in some respects, a little bit of Eddie Guerrero as well, Dean Malenko, all these guys were dropping. Very much all have little sections of Dynamite in there, and that's the tribute.
Even Brett, to be fair, Noel. I mean, when you saw those headbutts, obviously Brett and him were best friends, and obviously that's how Brett learned to wrestle. Really, getting the nose smashed on every night by Dynamite. Yeah. But would you agree with what Brett said, that he thinks pound for pound that Dynamite's probably the best bell-to-bell in-ring performer of all time?
Maybe not of all time. But certainly in the conversation without a shadow of a doubt. Certainly in the conversation in the debate. Yeah, it's hard to turn around and say who's the absolute best. You know what I mean? Because you'll throw 10 names out there on the table and all 10 belong in the conversation. You know what I mean? But absolutely in the conversation without a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah. So that's it. So let's get some of your honorable mentions. Now, Niall, you can actually mention the honorable mentions for me because obviously I sent you a list earlier and pretty much they were all on it. I will start off with saying Terry Funk. It was very difficult for me to not have him in this list. Now, people would say Dory as well because again, I had conversations with Dory back in the day when I was a young wannabe wrestler, and they were invaluable and free. And I'm sure if his wife knew he was giving me this advice for free and not signing up to go over to fucking Pensacola, she would have fucking stabbed him in the neck, and we wouldn't have a Dory anymore. But as the Beef said, because the Beef did go over and sit under the apple tree and the learning tree with Dory Funk. So, but he was more 70s, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas Terry, kind of younger brother, Terry Funk, I mean, again, in fact, I said it to you last week, on the Magnum show, Dynamite himself said that Terry Funk was probably the best seller he's ever seen, ever.
Yeah.
When people talk about Shawn Michaels being a seller, not a hope. He doesn't light a candle to Terry Funk.
Yeah. Yeah. When
he could wrestle a broomstick, couldn't he? And make it look good.
I think when people think of Terry Funk, especially some of our viewers, because they will be of the younger vintage, let's say, they think of Terry Funk as being the explosions and the hardcore and the blood and guts and the Foley stuff and the deathmatch stuff and all that kind of stuff. When I think of Terry Funk, I think of his work with Ric Flair.
Yeah, and Sting.
And Sting and stuff like that. That's where I think of Terry Funk. And even when you look at some of those documentaries on him and stuff like that, where he's even lacing up the boots, even to this day, for, chicken feed, or he's putting on a show for some charity or something like that and trying to raise a few bob for a local hospice or something like that. And, you can see the excitement in him pulling on the old gear and, people are nearly helping him putting the boots on and stuff like that. And then when he comes back, he can barely move off the chair and, the people do be around him going, "Are you okay? Are you all right now?"
He's had more comeback tours than Kiss.
yeah.
Anyone that's seen Beyond the Mat, when they look back at that one, that like really emotional one when he's saying forever. Yeah. Like a little side story that about Niall, and you've always wanted me to tell it, and I think maybe this is the perfect opportunity to tell it, right? About the prank. So Terry, did I ever tell this on the network? I don't believe so.
Don't think so.
Okay, so there's one Paddy Morrow out there who will be watching this and going, so you're in this with me too, pal. Paddy, at a time when the internet was just starting, well, certainly for us here in Ireland, acquired a lot of old school 80s wrestlers' phone numbers. And we would sometimes make calls.
As you do.
Now, 9 out of 10 of them would just hang up on you. Like, I remember I tried to call Tito Santana. He was like, "Hey, Tito," and he just hung up. I was like, shit, he's no fun. Arriba! But Terry Funk, you would never get him really. You would always get. We also had Stu Hart's number too, which we got. But and I told you that story too. But that'll be for a later date. We're talking to Terry Funk here, and this is a true story. Hand on heart, may I be struck dead, tomorrow. I was pissed one night and went back to the gaff, and there was a few people there, and it was on the handheld phone, so the lads would have to put their ears to the phone. Now, Paddy wasn't here for this one, but Paddy used to tell us he'd call Terry and he'd always get the wife, and he'd be like, "Oh, is Terry there? Oh, well, tell him it's Paddy from Ireland. Tell him to give me a call back." So she'd be like, "Some guy's calling you from Ireland, Paddy from Ireland." You know what I mean? And Terry's probably going, "I don't know what that fucking egg sucker's doing." But one day, as you remember in Beyond the Mat, he had that retirement match in the barn with Brett. Because obviously Brett done him the favor and come down from WWE, and so I used to have a fairly decent Brett impression. So I called one day and I was like, "Hello, it's Brett here. I'm looking to speak to Terry." And the wife answers. She goes, "Oh my God, it's Brett. How you doing?" He's like, "Oh, I'm very well, thank you. I think the last time I saw you was probably at the retirement match, right? I'm just making it up as I go along. And she was like, that's about right, yeah. And she's like, Terry's up on the farm now, because obviously he was a farmer in Amarillo.
Yeah.
And she, I had literally about a 5-minute conversation in that accent going, oh, that's really great to talk to you. It'd be great if you could get Terry to give me a call. So I'm sure Bret Hart somehow got a call from fucking Terry Funk somewhere down the line. Hey, Bret, I'm just calling you back. I'm just calling you back. Well, Terry, I didn't call you, but it's good to hear from you. So if anyone, and I think that is a cool little story, isn't it? Because it's, it was all fun. It wasn't done to, to hurt anybody. And obviously Terry's lost his wife now, stuff like that. So it'd probably make me out to be an asshole. But trust me, it was young 18-year-olds that saw an opportunity and took it with a few beers.
Big shout out to that old crew. I have to say, Paddy Morrow, probably the greatest reenactment of the barbershop ever.
Yeah, we'll keep that one QT, but it's true.
Absolutely brilliant.
And Marty Jannetty was involved.
Yeah, one half was there. And he wasn't the one going through the window for a change.
No.
But absolutely brilliant.
Oh, God.
Yeah, notable mentions. Who do we put in there? I mean, you have to put in most of the boys, if not all of them, from the Four Horsemen. Have to have a mention in there.
Arn was on my list at one point, and then so was Tully. Barry Windham was also
have on the list.
Very close to being there. I didn't really have Oli in the conversation just because fuck Oli. But an amazing worker in his own right too.
Now I was going to try a fast one on you, but you pulled me up on tag teams. But I felt Dusty needed to be on the list on his own for his body of work. But I was tempted to throw in the superpower, so Nikita got on the list.
Nikita was literally on the list as well. And the thing was, and you saw that with the little kind of sheet of paper that I had written down.
Yeah.
It was very difficult. Like, let me go back and look at that little sheet of paper. Bruiser Brody. I mean, good Lord, when you talk about a different, larger than life kind of character, he was going to be there. Of course, his arch nemesis Abdullah was such a huge star as well. Stan Hansen, you got to talk about. Andre the Giant. And I know Andre wasn't probably in his physical peak in the 80s, because like it was 84, 83. When he had his run with Hogan, he was more of a 70s guy, but still, that's pretty much all I can think about, that I didn't put on, because I shortened it down to that. But I mean, like you say, if you're, we could do this episode on the 80s tag team wrestlers, which I think we will do. That should probably be the next episode, really.
Yeah, well, I was actually going to say to you there, like the Von Erichs, definitely.
Jesus Christ, yeah.
Who?
Jerry Lawler himself.
Jerry
Listen,
Lawler. Yeah.
Say what you want about Jerry Lawler. I mean, literally one of the most believable and best wrestlers. I mean, I think he had one of the best punches in wrestling. Did you?
Yes, absolutely.
Adrian Adonis, guys. Watch him punching. Jake the Snake. You know what I mean? Jake the Snake. It's very, very hard. I found it very hard to leave Jake out, actually.
Yeah. Who else have I gotten there? Of course, the Midnight Express, Bobby Eaton.
Oh, well, look, all the tag teams. Like I said, the Hart Foundation, the Bulldogs, the Rougeos, you could have put them all in there. Although, actually, I take that back. Fuck the Rougeos. Definitely the Rock and Roll and Midnight Express. There's just so many. I mean, like, it's a who's who, really, isn't it?
Greg the Hammer. Greg the Hammer Valentine.
Hacksaw Jim Duggan. Anyone that used to think that Hacksaw was just, and by the way, thoughts and prayers here from the Dynamo Podcast Network.
For his recovery,
yeah, 100%. But yeah, man, like this. So Don Morocco, Junkyard Dog, goddammit.
Like, Butch Reed.
Yeah. I'm sure I can actually see now. Now I'm looking in your background and I can see a few guys. Like there you go, one man gang. I mean, what a very unique character. Bob Orton, Paul Orndorff. Like,
yeah.
It's just there's so many to mention, but I mean, it was what a decade for pro wrestling, and it's such an amazing thing. You know, this is a pleasure for us to be able to just sit down. You know, we're bringing people content, but we're also bringing back some amazing memories in our heads, and hopefully,
absolutely,
you know, some of the fans that listen to it, you know, get the same nostalgia when we're kind of giving our version of.
And if you are listening, drop your tens into the comments. And even if you're a younger viewer and you're not sure, then get up off your backside and go back and watch 80s wrestling, and then drop your 10 into the comments.
Jimmy Valiant. God damn it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
There's a name that probably a lot of people are like, I know the name, but I haven't seen his work. I would implore people to go and check his work out. I mean, like, as you say, any of these guys, I mean, you can go back and watch Starrcade 83 and just like everybody on the marquee and on the team sheet is, you know, it's who's who, isn't it?
Tommy Rich.
Oh, forget about it. Like,
it's weird. It's weird, isn't it? That the more you bring out these names, the more that it just, like, you know what I mean? Like, you nearly feel like you've done some of these guys hard done by, you know, that kind of way, because to pick a 10 from a list of, I mean, between the two of us, we could probably put together a list of 100.
Yeah. Oh, well, I mean? But that's 100. But that's
100%. And none of them out of place.
No, 100%.
You know,
like even the characters. If you're talking about characters of the 80s, then you're starting to bring in the Bundys and the George Animal Steels, and like I said,
the Garvins, Ronnie and Jimmy Garvin.
Yeah.
Jesus, you know, we spoke about Magnum spoke to us about them, you know. The Garvins, I brought the Garvins up, unbelievable. Superstar Billy Graham, yeah.
Incredible. Well, like, Stan Hansen was actually one of my personal favorites as well. I believe it or not, even though I was into my technical wrestling, everyone that knows that, but Niall, you're one of the only few people that know that I love some of those brawlers, and like Stan Hansen and Bruiser Brody in particular are two of my absolute favorite workers. You know, I'm sure you were expecting Brody on this one, and to be fair, it was really difficult to put him out. But I was like, with the list that we did pick, it was like, who do you take out?
Yeah.
For him?
We had like Tito Santana, Rick Martel.
Oh, Jesus Christ, yeah. Do you know what I mean? Like, people just think
endless.
That's a model, but like, good Lord, in AWA, another guy. I mean, don't forget, Kurt Hennig was up and coming at that time in the AWA, as we said, with Nick Bockwinkel. Now, he only kind of got his major stardom on national TV in 89 when he first came into the company. But yeah, you know, and I'm just pulling this from my head the same way you were. It's like
Bossman. You know, before he was ever Bossman.
Trailer, yeah, good Lord. No, it's man, I had a lot of fun doing this one. I have to say, it was it really brought me to a happy place.
Yeah, we hope when people listen to it and watch it that they take a look back, take a trip down memory lane, as we say, back into the 80s, and have a look at some of these guys and look at their work, look at their intensity, their love for the business. And, you know, a lot of these guys weren't getting paid a lot of money. You know what I mean? No. The vast bulk of the money was circled around a certain few, and the other guys were earning a week's wages for traveling long distances, and putting themselves through it. You know, so definitely take a look back. The 80s was a very special time for pro wrestling.
Very special. Probably one of the most special times. Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be interesting how it evolves now when we start doing the 90s and the noughties and all. You know, and how
90s was another great era in terms of some of the work that we were seeing in the ring was very pristine, but you know what I mean. So where
it was the changing of the guard as well, wasn't it? Where the let's say that we called the smaller guys that weren't really small, but they developed and got their opportunity through that time. You know, so that's going to be a very interesting one as well. Well, listen, my friend, a pleasure doing these as always. This has been Dynamos Dozen and the 4 Podmen's look back at the kings of the 80s, as we'll call them in pro wrestling. Definitely. Through honorable mentions and through our top 10 lists. Till next time, my friend.
Pleasure.